What if the greatest royal scandal isn't about Meghan Markle at all, but about the man she married? What if everything you thought you knew about Prince Harry, his bloodline, his place in the monarchy, his very identity, was never what it seemed? Imagine the weight of growing up in a palace surrounded by whispers. Whispers that followed you from the moment you learned to walk, to the moment you looked in the mirror as a young man and asked yourself, "Am I really who they say I am?" For Harry, those whispers weren't just background noise. They were daggers. And Meghan Markle, his wife, his confidant, now claims those daggers cut him deeper than the world will ever know. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. She broke down in private, admitting, "I can't hide it anymore. It destroys him every single day." Stop for a moment and think about that. A duchess, a wife, a mother, publicly accused of tearing apart a royal family. Yet here she is, turning the camera away from herself and shining it on Harry's deepest wound. Why would Meghan, who has guarded her own secrets with iron walls, suddenly risk it all by confessing his? Why now? This isn't just gossip. It's the crack in the foundation of a 1,000-year-old institution. Because at the heart of the British monarchy is the belief in bloodlines, lineage, succession, the idea that a crown isn't chosen, it's inherited. But if Harry's inheritance itself is tainted by doubt, then everything he's built his life on becomes quicksand. And here's the real question for you. How do you live your life when the world keeps telling you that your father may not actually be your father? Harry's struggle with identity has always been there if you know where to look. The late Princess Diana once said she wanted her boys to grow up knowing real life outside palace walls. But perhaps she knew something more. Perhaps she feared what would happen if the truth ever surfaced. And Meghan? She now claims Harry's torment over his parentage was the silent ghost that stalked every argument, every decision, every tear behind closed doors. This isn't just about scandal, it's about survival. Let's step back for a second. Think of the Harry you first saw as a boy, red-haired, mischievous, a bit of a rebel. The spare to William's heir. He was the cheeky prince, the boy who wore a Nazi costume at a party, the young man photographed stumbling out of clubs in London. The media laughed, judged, ridiculed. But maybe, just maybe, those reckless actions were born from something much darker, an inner war about whether he even belonged. And Meghan, entering his life years later, didn't just marry into that. She married into the storm. She found herself beside a man who had spent decades haunted by a question no crown, no palace, and no title could answer. Now pause and imagine this. You're Meghan. You've watched the man you love break into tears over something he can't escape. You've seen him explode in anger when the media drags out the paternity rumor headlines again. You've held him when he whispered, "What if they're right?" And you've reached your breaking point. So you finally confess to the world. It destroys him every single day. Do you see how explosive this is? For years, the monarchy has hidden scandals behind stone walls. Affairs, betrayals, financial mishaps, always denied, always covered, always brushed under the rug. But this isn't just another scandal. This is about the very question of whether Prince Harry is truly royal. And here's where the timing matters. Why would Meghan break this silence now? The couple has already left the monarchy. They've already spoken out in interviews, in documentaries, in books. But until now, this one topic, the question of Harry's paternity, was always a red line. The press speculated, but Meghan and Harry refused to feed it. Until now. So what changed? Some point to recent legal filings involving royal assets, inheritance disputes, and succession claims. Others believe Meghan, cornered by public backlash and dwindling Hollywood opportunities, saw no choice but to unleash the most dangerous weapon left in her arsenal. The truth about Harry's deepest pain. And some whisper that this wasn't strategy at all, it was desperation. An emotional slip when the mask finally cracked. Either way, the effect was nuclear. In one sentence, Meghan reignited decades of gossip, thrust Harry back under the microscope, and set the world buzzing with the most dangerous question of all. If not Charles, then who? And think about the symbolism here. Charles, the man who sits on the throne, whose entire reign depends on the stability of the monarchy, has been directly tied to whispers that his own son may not be his blood. For Harry, every handshake, every smile, Every photograph with Charles carries the shadow of doubt. Imagine standing next to the King of England while the world quietly wonders if you're even his child. Can you feel the weight of that? Now, some will say Meghan went too far, that this was cruel, unnecessary, even manipulative. But others will argue she finally told the truth the palace has suppressed for years. Whichever side you land on, one thing is undeniable. Meghan has changed the narrative forever. And that's exactly why we're here today. Because if you follow the threads of this story, the origins of the rumors, the players involved, Diana's role, the palace's silence, you begin to see something chilling. A picture of a young boy raised in privilege but tormented by whispers, a man pushed to the brink by the very system that demanded his silence, and a wife who now dares to say what everyone else has feared to admit. This isn't just another headline. It's a generational earthquake. Let's be clear, Harry's story is not about whether he looks like Charles. It's not about red hair, cheekbones, or photo comparisons. It's about identity. It's about what happens when the very thing you're supposed to inherit, your name, your legacy, your place in history, feels like it's built on a lie. And Meghan? She's just handed us the match to set it all ablaze. So as we begin this journey, I need to ask you, do you believe Harry is Charles's son? Or do you believe the whispers that another man's blood runs in his veins? More importantly, what would it mean for the monarchy, for William, for Harry's children, if the rumors were true? Keep that question in your mind, because every chapter of this story peels back another layer. From the origins of the whispers to the palace's cover-ups, from Diana's hidden letters to Harry's own haunting words, piece by piece, you will see why Meghan could no longer hold her silence. And remember this, every royal scandal eventually finds its way to the light. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if I told you that one of the most dangerous rumors in modern royal history began not with a scandalous photo, not with a leaked document, but with something far simpler, whispers? Soft at first, barely audible, carried between journalists, staff, and insiders. But whispers, when repeated enough times, gain power. They take on a life of their own. And in the case of Prince Harry, those whispers grew so loud that even the walls of Buckingham Palace couldn't keep them out. Let's set the stage. It's the 1980s. Britain is in upheaval. Margaret Thatcher is in Downing Street. The tabloids are in their golden age, thriving on scandal and obsession with the royal family. Charles and Diana have married in what was hailed as the wedding of the century. The fairy tale, the spectacle, the global event that captivated millions. But behind the photographs of smiling newlyweds, behind the balcony kisses, cracks were already forming. Diana was young, beautiful, and deeply unhappy. Charles was cold, distant, already carrying the weight of a complicated relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. The press adored Diana, but inside the palace, she was isolated, struggling, desperate for affection. And it was during these years, while her marriage began to crumble, that rumors of affairs surfaced. Now let's pause here. Affairs in the royal family are not new. History is littered with monarchs, princes, and duchesses entangled in extramarital scandals. But what made Diana different was her vulnerability. She was adored, yes, but also scrutinized to the point of suffocation. And when whispers emerged that she had found comfort in the arms of others, the press latched on like sharks smelling blood in the water. Here's where it gets interesting. When Prince Harry was born in 1984, the comparisons began almost immediately, not to Charles, but to someone else. Harry's bright red hair, his striking features, his mischievous smile. These details fueled whispers that didn't fade with time. Instead, they grew. And they grew because of one man, James Hewitt. But before we dive into Hewitt, let's focus on the whispers themselves. Picture Harry as a young boy, not yet aware of the media storm surrounding him. To the world, he was simply the spare. Cheeky, full of life, trailing behind William. Yet, behind closed doors, the whispers began to filter in. Staffers gossiping in corridors. Journalists writing between the lines. And eventually, cruel playground taunts. Imagine being a child and hearing classmates say, "You're not really a prince." Stop and think, what would that do to you? This is where the story takes its first emotional turn. Because Harry didn't just hear the whispers once. He heard them constantly. They became background noise in his life. Imagine living every day with a question mark hanging over your head. Not just about your identity, but about your very existence in the monarchy. And here's the cruel irony. The more the palace tried to ignore the whispers, the more powerful they became. Silence, in this case, was gasoline. Let's dig deeper. The tabloids in the late 80s and early 90s were relentless. They didn't simply report news, they shaped it. And Harry, young and defenseless, became the perfect target. The media didn't outright accuse him of being illegitimate. No, they did something far more insidious. They hinted. They compared photos. They drew timelines. They fed the public just enough to keep the rumors alive without ever fully crossing the line into slander. Clever, isn't it? Because whispers are harder to fight than outright accusations. And then came the cruel jokes. Late-night television hosts, satirical cartoons, even some so-called royal experts dropping sly comments on air. He doesn't quite look like Charles, does he? Wink, smile, move on. But the damage? Already done, because those seeds of doubt had been planted. Now here's a contradiction worth noting. While the world speculated about Harry's paternity, Charles himself seemed determined to brush it aside. In public, he played the role of father. He held Harry's hand. He posed for photos. But behind the scenes, insiders whispered that Charles was often distant, preferring William, the heir, over Harry, the spare. Can you imagine how that must have felt for Harry? Already dealing with doubts, already wrestling with whispers, and now sensing his father's coldness. It was the perfect storm for an identity crisis. But here's where the whispers grew even more dangerous. Diana herself was not silent about her struggles. In interviews, in conversations with friends, she admitted her marriage to Charles was broken long before the public knew. And when those admissions became public after her death, the whispers gained legitimacy. After all, if Diana had been unfaithful, wasn't it possible the rumors about Harry were true? Think about it. This wasn't just a tabloid invention. It was a rumor rooted in fragments of truth. Diana had affairs. That much we know. And Harry didn't look like Charles. That much was obvious. But does 2 + 2 = 4 in this case? Or is it a cruel arithmetic designed by the press to destroy a young man's sense of self? Let me ask you, if you were Harry, would you want to know the truth? Or would you be too afraid of what you might discover? Now, here's a twist. While Harry was growing up under the weight of whispers, William was not. William looked like Diana. He looked like Charles. He fit the mold of the future king. No whispers, no doubts, no questions. Do you see the contradiction? One brother's identity was secure, celebrated, unquestioned. The other's was ridiculed, doubted, undermined. That dynamic didn't just create tension between brothers. It created wounds that may never heal. And here's where Meghan enters the story much later. She didn't create the whispers. She inherited them. When she married Harry, she walked straight into a storm that had been brewing for decades. And what did she find? A husband haunted. A man tormented by whispers he couldn't silence. That's why her confession, "It destroys him every day," wasn't just an emotional plea. It was confirmation of a truth the world had long suspected. Harry's deepest struggle was never with the tabloids. It was with himself. But let's go back one last time to the origins. The whispers began in the 80s. They spread in the 90s. They exploded after Diana's death in 1997. And they followed Harry into adulthood, into his military service, into his marriage. The whisper that never died. Now pause and ask yourself, how do you silence something that was never spoken loudly to begin with? How do you fight a rumor that lives in glances, jokes, comparisons, and unspoken doubts? That's the cruelty of Harry's story. He could never escape it. And yet, just when the whispers seemed to fade, when Harry and Meghan stepped back from the monarchy and tried to build a new life, Meghan reignited them. Not maliciously, not strategically, but emotionally, because sometimes the truth slips out in moments of weakness. And Meghan, by saying those words, reminded the world of the whisper that never died. But if whispers alone could torment Harry for decades, imagine what happens when we put a name, a face, and a timeline to them. Because the strongest rumors didn't just compare features. They pointed directly to one man. And his name wasn't Charles. It was James Hewitt. And that's where our story takes its next explosive turn. What if the greatest threat to the monarchy's image wasn't a scandal splashed across the front page, but a man who looked just a little too much like a young prince? A man whose name, whispered in hushed tones and shouted in tabloid headlines, became the centerpiece of one of the most enduring conspiracy theories of our time. That man was James Hewitt. Now, you might ask, who exactly was James Hewitt? To the public, he was an army officer, a cavalryman with charm and poise. To Diana, he was a confidant, a companion, and eventually, a lover. But to the tabloids, he was something far more dangerous, the other man. The one they could point to whenever Harry's ginger hair or cheeky smile sparked comparisons. Let's rewind. Diana met James Hewitt in 1986, 2 years after Harry was born. That detail is crucial. Remember it, because here lies the contradiction at the heart of the rumor. If Harry was born in 1984, how could Hewitt possibly be the father if the affair began in 1986? On paper, the math doesn't add up. And yet, facts never stopped whispers from snowballing into a storm. Why? Because human beings are visual creatures. And visually, Harry and Hewitt shared traits that became impossible for the press to ignore. Both had striking red hair, fair skin, and an athletic build. Both carried themselves with a mischievous glint in their eyes. For journalists hungry for a headline, it was the perfect story. Side-by-side photo spreads practically wrote themselves. Think about it. Have you ever seen two people who look so alike it's uncanny? That's exactly how tabloids framed the comparison between Harry and Hewitt. Forget timelines, forget dates, forget reality. To them, resemblance was enough. And to an eager public, eager to question and speculate about royalty, it was irresistible. Now, here's where the story takes a darker turn. James Hewitt himself didn't exactly help. Over the years, he gave interviews. He wrote a book. He spoke about his relationship with Diana in ways that many found distasteful. Instead of burying the affair quietly, he confirmed it. He admitted he and Diana were deeply involved. And while he repeatedly insisted that the affair began after Harry's birth, the damage was already done. Because once the public hears a name attached to a rumor, it becomes nearly impossible to detach the two. Can you imagine what this meant for Harry? Growing up, he didn't just deal with whispers about his parentage. He had to deal with a living, breathing man walking around in the world, tied forever to his name. A man who looked like him. A man the tabloids couldn't resist calling Harry's real father. Now let's step into Harry's shoes for a moment. Imagine flipping through a magazine at 12 years old and seeing your mother's former lover's face next to yours, with headlines asking, "Is this the real father of the prince?" Imagine the humiliation, the anger, the confusion. Would you laugh it off? Or would you lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the world saw something you couldn't? And it wasn't just the press. Satirists and comedians had a field day. Jokes on television, snide remarks in gossip columns. Even some politicians couldn't resist hinting at the resemblance. For Harry, there was no escape. Every stage of his life was haunted by Hewitt's shadow. But here's where it gets fascinating. James Hewitt himself eventually grew bitter about the rumors. At first, the attention gave him relevance. He was interviewed, published, even paid for his side of the story. But later in life, he admitted that the comparison to Harry had ruined him. He was treated as a scandalous footnote in royal history, a man defined not by his military service or his own merits, but by his affair with Diana and the whispers it spawned. There's irony in that, isn't there? The very rumor that tormented Harry also destroyed the man at the center of it. Now let's return to Diana. She was fully aware of how damaging the rumors could be. Friends close to her later said she feared for Harry's emotional well-being if the whispers persisted. But even Diana's attempts to shield her son couldn't stop the press from drawing those cruel comparisons. After all, the press didn't care about the truth, they cared about the story. And James Hewitt was the perfect villain for their narrative. But ask yourself this. Do you think the palace could have done more to shut it down? Because here's the contradiction. The royal family, with all its power, influence, and media control, never issued a strong denial. They never stood up and said, "This is false. Harry is Charles's son," end of discussion. Instead, they kept quiet, just as they always do. And silence, as we said before, is gasoline. Because silence allows people to imagine the worst. Silence lets whispers fester into legends. And in Harry's case, the palace's silence meant the rumor grew unchecked for decades. But here's where the story twists again. Scientific facts, timelines, real evidence. Every piece of objective data shows that Hewitt could not be Harry's father. Harry was born in September 1984. Diana and Hewitt did not begin their affair until 1986. End of story, right? Wrong. Because rumors are not built on facts, they're built on emotion. And emotions are much harder to silence. Let me ask you this. If someone showed you two photographs, one of young Harry, one of James Hewitt, and told you they were father and son, would you believe it? Many people did, and many still do, because resemblance has power, sometimes more power than truth. And that's exactly why Meghan's confession hits so hard. Because even though she didn't mention Hewitt by name, everyone already knew who the whispers pointed to. By admitting Harry was destroyed every day by the rumors, Meghan essentially confirmed that James Hewitt's shadow still looms over their lives. So now, let's zoom in on Harry himself as an adult. By his 20s, he was already sick of the comparisons. Friends say he'd explode with anger whenever Hewitt's name was mentioned. He hated the jokes. He hated the sly smirks. And more than anything, he hated that the palace never defended him. Imagine the betrayal. The family you serve, the institution you represent, refuses to protect you from a rumor that eats away at your soul. How long before that resentment grows into rebellion? How long before you say, "Enough, I'm walking away"? Doesn't that sound eerily familiar? Because isn't that exactly what Harry eventually did? And here's where we see how James Hewitt's shadow didn't just torment Harry. It shaped his destiny. It fueled his resentment toward the monarchy. It deepened his bond with Meghan, who promised to stand by him against the cruelty of the press. And it played no small part in his decision to step back from royal life altogether. The irony? A rumor built on shaky foundations may have helped dismantle centuries of royal tradition. But before we get there, we need to ask the question no one dares to ask out loud. What if the timeline is wrong? What if the official story, that Diana met Hewitt in 1986, is just another carefully curated palace narrative? What if the affair began earlier than anyone admitted? Because if that's true, then everything changes. And the whispers don't just haunt Harry, they threaten the monarchy itself. But what came next would take this story from cruel rumor to chilling possibility. And it starts with the woman at the center of it all, Diana. What happens when the secret that haunts your husband every day becomes the weight you carry too? What happens when the whispers he's spent his whole life running from don't just follow him, but follow you into every room, every headline, every conversation? For Meghan Markle, this wasn't just Harry's torment. It became hers. Imagine it. You marry the man you love. You think you're prepared for the media circus, the scrutiny, the constant flash of cameras. But then you discover something deeper, something darker, that your husband has been haunted since childhood by a question he cannot escape, whether the man the world calls his father really is his father. And Meghan? She saw that torment up close. She lived it with him. She once admitted in a moment of vulnerability, "I can't hide it anymore." It destroys him every day. Think about the gravity of those words. She didn't say, "It hurts him." She didn't say, "It bothers him sometimes." She said it destroys him every day. Stop for a second and let that sink in. Every single day. Can you imagine what that looks like in a marriage? Waking up next to someone who carries that invisible burden? Watching them struggle not with the outside world, but with themselves? This is where Meghan's burden begins. Because when you love someone, their pain becomes your pain. And Harry's pain was relentless. Let's rewind to their early days together. Meghan meets Harry, the prince who charmed her with his humor and his vulnerability. But behind the charm, she quickly realized, was a man scarred by years of ridicule and doubt. Harry confided in her. He told her about the whispers. He told her about James Hewitt. He told her about the taunts, the cruel jokes, the way the press had mocked him for decades. And Meghan, stepping into this storm, suddenly felt the enormity of what she had inherited. Now, let's be honest. Meghan has faced her own share of public torment. The racism, the headlines, the relentless attacks on her character. But even she admitted that Harry's struggle was different. Because her critics attacked her identity in the present. Harry's critics attacked the very foundation of his existence. Do you see the difference? And that's why Meghan's confession hits so hard. Because for her to say, "It destroys him every day," means she has seen what none of us ever have. The raw, unfiltered version of Harry. The nights when he couldn't sleep. The mornings when he couldn't face the world. The times when he looked her in the eye and asked, "What if they're right?" Now pause and ask yourself, how do you answer that? How do you comfort your husband when the doubt eating him alive is something you can never prove or disprove? This is the contradiction Meghan faced. On the one hand, she wanted to protect Harry. She wanted to shield him, to reassure him, to remind him of his worth. But on the other hand, every time she opened a newspaper, every time she scrolled through social media, she saw the same cruel rumors staring back at her. And she knew, no matter how much love she gave him, no matter how many times she whispered, "You are enough," the whispers would never stop. And here's where the emotional toll comes in. Because Harry didn't just carry this burden privately, it bled into their marriage. Meghan admitted that the rumors, the doubts, the endless comparisons were like ghosts at the table. They were always there, unseen, but never absent. Imagine sitting down for dinner with your family, and in the corner, lurking silently, is the shadow of James Hewitt. Imagine raising your children and knowing that one day, they too will hear the whispers about their father's paternity. That was Meghan's nightmare, and it broke her. Let's not sugarcoat it. Meghan is strong, yes. She's outspoken, yes. But she's also human. And when she said, "It destroys him every day," she wasn't just talking about Harry. She was talking about herself. Because watching someone you love self-destruct, even in silence, is its own kind of destruction. Now here's where the story takes a shocking twist. Meghan didn't just carry Harry's pain. She carried the pressure of whether to speak out or stay silent. For years, she bit her tongue. For years, she smiled in interviews and dodged questions. But deep down, she knew the truth. Harry's torment wasn't going away, and her silence wasn't saving him. So she reached a breaking point. Think about the courage, or the recklessness, it takes to confess what she did. To say aloud, in front of cameras, what the palace had spent decades suppressing. That her husband is destroyed by rumors of his paternity. That the whispers never died. That this isn't just a headline, it's their reality. But why say it then? Why not years earlier? Why not years later? Some say it was strategy, a carefully calculated move to seize control of the narrative. Others say it was desperation, a slip in a moment of raw emotion. But whichever it was, Meghan made a choice. And that choice has consequences. Because the second those words left her lips, the whispers turned into roars. The tabloids pounced. Social media lit up. Analysts debated. Supporters defended. Critics attacked. And through it all, Harry was thrust back into the spotlight he had tried so hard to escape. The very thing Meghan wanted to protect him from was reignited by her own confession. Do you see the irony? But maybe, just maybe, that was the point. Maybe Meghan realized that silence was no longer protection. Maybe she realized that the only way to exorcise this ghost was to drag it into the light. So let me ask you this. Was Meghan brave for speaking the truth, or was she reckless for unleashing it? Whichever side you fall on, one thing is undeniable. Her words revealed the depth of Harry's pain in a way nothing else ever could. And here's the most chilling part. Meghan hinted there was more. She didn't just say Harry was destroyed by the rumors. She hinted at documents. Letters. Proof that the palace had long tried to bury. What could those documents be? Were they medical records? Private correspondence from Diana? Internal palace memos about succession fears? We don't know. But Meghan's tone suggested one thing. She knows more than she's letting on. And that's the cliffhanger, isn't it? Because if the whispers alone could torment Harry for decades, imagine what happens if hard evidence ever comes to light. And Meghan, knowingly or not, just cracked the door open. But the question remains, what exactly is hidden in those documents? And why has the palace fought so hard to keep them buried? The answer, as you'll soon see, is darker than anyone imagined. What is more dangerous? A scandal that breaks into the open or a secret that festers in silence? When it comes to the British monarchy, the answer has always been silence. Silence is their shield. Silence is their sword. And silence is their curse. But here's the question. Was the palace's silence about Harry's paternity rumors truly just business as usual? Or was it something far more sinister? A cover-up? Think about it. The monarchy is an institution built on image, on bloodlines, on the illusion of perfection. Every scandal, every crack, is swiftly covered with tradition, pomp, and carefully rehearsed smiles. But what happens when the scandal cuts at the very heart of that illusion? The legitimacy of the bloodline itself. Harry wasn't just another royal. He wasn't some distant cousin who could be swept under the rug. He was the son of the future king, the brother of the heir, a heartbeat away from the throne, which means the whispers about his paternity weren't just personal, they were political. They were existential. So how did the palace respond? By doing what it always does. By closing ranks. By pretending the whispers didn't exist. By hoping that, like smoke, they would fade if no one fanned the flames. But did they fade? Or did they grow louder? Let's rewind to the 1990s. Princess Diana is gone. The nation is in mourning. The monarchy is shaken like never before. Public trust is at an all-time low. And in the middle of this grief, whispers about Harry's true father roar back to life. Tabloids run side-by-side photos of Harry and James Hewitt. Radio hosts make jokes. Late-night comedians snicker. And what does the palace say? Nothing. Not a word. Now, silence can mean two things. It can mean confidence. We don't even dignify this with a response. Or it can mean fear. If we deny it, we risk drawing more attention. If we ignore it, maybe it will die down. Which do you think it was? Because here's the contradiction. The palace has fought tooth and nail against far smaller scandals. They've issued statements about dresses, about Christmas cards, about whether Kate and William were feuding with Meghan and Harry. They've waded into the muck of celebrity gossip when it suited them. And yet, on the question of Harry's paternity, the most dangerous rumor of all, they stayed silent. Why? Some insiders claim it was strategy, that by speaking out, they would give the rumor legitimacy. Better to let it rot in the shadows. But others whisper something far darker, that the silence was not strategy, but necessity. That denying the rumor outright would risk a demand for proof. And proof, in the form of DNA, was the one thing the monarchy could never allow. Let's pause here. Imagine if Harry had demanded a paternity test as a teenager. Imagine if the results were leaked. Even if Charles was confirmed as his father, the very act of testing would shatter the illusion of unquestionable bloodlines. The monarchy thrives on myth. And the moment you need science to prove the myth, the magic dies. So the palace made a choice. No test. No comment. No denial. Just silence. But silence is not neutral. Silence is a statement. And in Harry's case, silence became its own kind of cruelty. Because while the palace ignored the whispers, Harry lived them. He heard them. He endured them. And the one institution that could have protected him chose to protect itself instead. Imagine being a young man, mocked in newspapers, compared to your mother's lover, and knowing your family could silence it with one official statement. But they don't. Imagine what that does to your trust, to your loyalty, to your love for the very institution you were born into. Do you see now why Meghan said, "It destroys him every day"? Because the whispers weren't just about Harry's parentage. They were about the palace's betrayal. The realization that the people who should have defended him, his family, his institution, never did. And here's where the story takes an even darker twist. Over the years, multiple sources have claimed that internal palace documents exist addressing the rumors, not proving or disproving them, but strategizing. Communications memos detailing how to respond or not respond. Crisis management blueprints in case the rumors exploded into a full-blown scandal. In other words, the palace may not have investigated the truth, but they certainly prepared for the fallout. What does that tell you? It tells you that they knew. They knew this was dangerous. They knew this could destabilize the monarchy. They knew the whispers were powerful enough to threaten everything they stood for. And so they did what they do best, covered it up. Cover-ups don't always mean lies. Sometimes they mean silence. Sometimes they mean strategic leaks of other scandals to distract the public. Sometimes they mean sacrificing individuals to protect the crown. And in this case, the individual sacrificed was Harry himself. Because while the palace ignored the whispers, Harry bore the brunt. He became the joke, the punchline, the spare, mocked not only for his status, but for his very identity. And the palace? They stayed silent. Always silent. But silence breeds resentment. And resentment breeds rebellion. So let me ask you, do you think Harry would have left the monarchy if the palace had defended him? If they had stood up, issued a statement, protected his name, do you think he and Meghan would have fled to California? Or do you think their story might have been very different? This is the tragedy of the palace's silence. It didn't protect the crown. It fractured it. Now here's a shocking detail. At least once, A journalist directly confronted James Hewitt about the rumors, asking if he was Harry's father. Hewitt denied it, citing the timeline. But do you know what the palace did in response? Nothing. They didn't amplify his denial. They didn't support it. They let it float into the air and disappear. Why? Because, once again, to acknowledge the rumor would be to risk legitimizing it. But do you see the paradox? By not amplifying the denial, the rumor survived. By not stamping it out, the whisper lived on. And Meghan's confession decades later proved that the whisper was never just tabloid fodder. It was Harry's lived reality. It was the ghost at every dinner table, the ache in every quiet moment, the question that gnawed at him when the cameras were gone. So, was the palace guilty of silence, or of a cover-up? Because here's the final twist. Sometimes silence and cover-up are the same thing. Sometimes what you don't say is the loudest message of all. And maybe, just maybe, the palace's silence wasn't about protecting Charles. It was about protecting something bigger, the monarchy itself. Because if the world ever believed, even for a second, that one of Diana's sons wasn't truly royal blood, the very idea of succession would come under fire. If Harry could be questioned, why not William? If William could be questioned, why not the entire Windsor line? That is the nightmare scenario. That is what the palace fears most. And that is why silence became their weapon. But here's the cliffhanger. Silence can only last so long. Secrets can only stay buried until someone digs them up. And in this story, someone did. Because hidden among Diana's belongings, tucked away in letters and journals, were hints that she knew the whispers would one day consume her son. And she left behind more than just warnings. She left behind clues. And those clues may hold the key to everything. What if the truth about Harry's greatest torment wasn't whispered by outsiders, but written down by his own mother? What if Diana, forever called the people's princess, saw the storm coming long before Harry did, and left behind words that could shake the monarchy to its core? This is where the story takes a chilling turn. Diana was no ordinary royal. She was a woman who felt everything deeply, who spoke when she was told to be silent, who saw herself not just as a princess, but as a protector of her children. And when she realized that her marriage to Charles was built on sand, when she realized the palace would never truly protect her, she did what any mother would do. She looked ahead. She anticipated the battles her sons would one day fight. And she began to write. Now let's pause. We know Diana wrote letters. Dozens of them. To friends. To confidants. To lovers. To the public in the form of carefully worded notes. Many of these letters were filled with emotion, with warnings, with glimpses into her inner world. But some of them, according to those who've seen them, carried something more, an awareness of the rumors that would haunt Harry for the rest of his life. Picture Diana in the 1990s, surrounded by chaos. Her marriage unraveling, Camilla looming, the press hounding her every step. And in the middle of all this, she watches her youngest son grow up with features that invite constant comparison. She hears the whispers. She feels the tension. And she knows, one day, Harry will hear them too. So she picks up a pen. She writes not just about her own heartbreak, but about her fear for her son's future. She hints that Harry may face questions about his identity, that the palace will bury the truth rather than protect him, that the same silence which destroyed her could one day destroy him. Let me ask you this. Can you imagine reading a letter from your late mother, years after her death, where she warns you about the very thing tormenting you now? Can you imagine the pain of realizing she knew all along, and that she feared it would crush you? That is the legacy of Diana's hidden warnings. And here's where the contradictions come in. Some claim these letters were destroyed, suppressed by the palace to avoid scandal. Others claim they still exist, locked away in private collections or in the hands of trusted friends. A few even surfaced at auctions, snippets of Diana's handwriting, speaking of betrayal, loneliness, and the desire to protect her children. But one detail stands out above all. Diana once confided that she believed the palace would use Harry's identity as a weapon, that if he ever stepped out of line, they would allow the whispers to consume him. Think about that for a moment. What mother fears not just for her child's safety, but for their very identity being weaponized against them? What kind of institution makes a woman feel that powerless? Now, imagine Meghan. She marries Harry, and one day, perhaps through friends of Diana or through whispers of her own, she comes across these warnings. Maybe she sees fragments of letters. Maybe she hears stories passed down by those who knew Diana well. And suddenly, she realizes this isn't just a rumor Harry has been running from. This is a prophecy Diana foresaw decades earlier. Do you see the weight of that? Harry's torment isn't just his own. It's inherited. It's the echo of a mother's fear, passed down in ink and sealed in silence. And here's the emotional punch. For Harry, every letter from Diana is precious. Every word, every line, is a connection to the mother he lost too soon. But hidden among those words may be clues that cut deeper than he ever expected. Because if Diana hinted at the whispers, if she acknowledged them even indirectly, then Harry has to ask himself, did she know something more? Was she confirming the rumor? Or was she simply acknowledging the cruelty of perception? That question lingers like a ghost. But here's where the story takes another shocking turn. Reports claim that in one of Diana's letters, she spoke of being forced out, that she believed there was a conspiracy against her, that forces within the palace wanted her silenced. She even predicted her own death in a car crash, a prediction that came chillingly true in Paris. So if Diana foresaw her own demise, is it really unthinkable that she also foresaw Harry's torment? That she left behind not just warnings, but a roadmap of what was to come? Let's pause here and ask, what would you do if you were Harry? Would you read every one of those letters, desperate for answers? Or would you tuck them away, afraid of what you might discover? Because here's the contradiction. The very letters that could bring him peace might also bring him pain. They might confirm his worst fears. They might validate the whispers that destroy him every day. And Meghan? She's caught in the middle. She wants to shield him, but she also knows the truth cannot stay buried forever. And so, when she confessed publicly, it destroys him every day. Was she not also honoring Diana's warnings? Was she not giving voice to the fear Diana wrote about decades earlier? Now, think about the palace again. Do you really believe they don't know what's in those letters? Do you really believe they wouldn't do everything in their power to suppress them? Because if Diana acknowledged the whispers, if she hinted at them in her own words, then the palace's silence becomes not just self-preservation, but complicity. And here's the chilling irony. The very letters Diana may have written to protect her son could now be the key to his destruction. Because if they ever surface, the world won't see them as warnings. The world will see them as confirmation. But maybe that's why Meghan spoke out. Maybe she realized that the whispers were never going to die, that the only way to reclaim the narrative was to say it out loud before someone else weaponized it. Maybe her confession wasn't recklessness, it was preemption. And yet, it leaves us with the most haunting question of all. What exactly did Diana write? Was it a vague warning about the cruelty of the press? Or was it something sharper, something specific, something that pointed directly to the truth Harry fears most? We don't know. And that's what makes it terrifying. Because if those letters ever resurface in full, if their contents ever become public, the monarchy won't just face whispers. It will face fire. And Harry? He will have to face the one thing he has avoided his entire life. The possibility that his mother left behind the answer he's been too afraid to seek. But here's the cliffhanger. Before Harry could confront Diana's words, before Meghan could fully unpack their meaning, Harry himself began to drop hints. In interviews, in memoirs, in moments where his guard slipped. And in those moments, the world heard something it had never heard before. Harry himself admitting, I've always wondered, what happens when the whispers stop being background noise and start coming out of your own mouth? When the question you've avoided all your life slips past your lips in a moment of honesty. For Prince Harry, those moments did happen. And in those moments, he gave the world a glimpse into the storm raging inside him. Let's start with this. Harry has never confirmed the rumor. He has never said outright, Charles isn't my father. But what he has done, on more than one occasion, is let the mask slip. And when he did, the world listened. Closely. Think about it. For decades, the British press speculated. The tabloids published side-by-side comparisons. Comedians made jokes. But nothing hit harder than when Harry himself admitted, even subtly, that he wasn't immune to the whispers. That he, too, had looked in the mirror and wondered. And he did. In interviews, in off-the-cuff remarks, even in his own memoir, Harry gave hints. Sometimes they were disguised as humor. Other times they were cloaked in anger. But the subtext was always the same. He questioned, do you remember when Harry joked about not looking like Charles? It was framed as humor, but was it really? Was it not a glimpse of a deeper insecurity? Because behind every joke lies a truth. And Harry's truth was raw. Or consider the memoir. In Spare, Harry openly described feeling like an outsider, like the spare to William's heir. But more than that, he admitted to feeling disconnected, as if he never truly fit the mold expected of him. Was that just about duty? Or was it about identity itself? Let's dig deeper. In one striking passage, Harry referenced the cruelty of the press, how they mocked him, how they repeated the rumors endlessly. And then came the slip. He admitted, "I've always wondered." 3 words. Simple, haunting, explosive. Because in that moment, Harry confirmed what Meghan later revealed. The rumors weren't just external. They were internal. They weren't just noise from outsiders. They were questions that lived inside Harry himself. Now, pause and imagine this. You're Harry. You've grown up your entire life under the gaze of the world. You've heard every cruel comparison. You've read every headline. And then, late at night, when you're alone, the question slips in, what if they're right? Can you feel the weight of that? It's not just a question. It's a poison, a slow, daily drip of doubt. And Harry admitted it. Not fully, not with details, but enough. Enough for us to know that the rumor that destroys him every day is not just rumor. It is his inner dialogue. And this is where the contradiction lies. Harry has spent years trying to break free from the monarchy. He left. He renounced his titles. He chose California over Kensington. He told the world he didn't care about royal life. But if he truly didn't care, why would this rumor destroy him? Why would he confess, even in passing, that he's wondered? Because identity is not something you can escape. You can leave the palace. You can leave the country. But you cannot leave yourself. And Harry, for all his rebellion, is still haunted by the one question he cannot answer. Now here's the twist. Every time Harry let slip a comment like that, the media exploded. Headlines screamed. Harry questions his parentage. Analysts dissected his words. Supporters defended him. Critics mocked him. But for Harry, the damage was already done. Because once the words left his mouth, they could never be taken back. And Meghan? She was there. She heard the late-night confessions, the moments of weakness, the quiet admissions. So when she said, "It destroys him every day," she wasn't exaggerating. She was echoing Harry's own words. But let's not forget the irony. Harry once said he hated the press for amplifying the rumors. And yet, by admitting he had always wondered, he gave the press its biggest gift. He validated the very thing he hated. Do you see the tragedy? Because Harry is trapped in a paradox. If he stays silent, the whispers consume him privately. If he speaks, they consume him publicly. Either way, he loses. Now here's a surprising detail. In conversations with friends, Harry reportedly admitted he considered taking a DNA test. Think about that. The prince, second son of the future king, considering verifying his bloodline with a swab and a lab result. But according to those same sources, he never went through with it. Why? Fear. Because what if the test proved the whispers wrong? That would bring relief, yes, but it would also bring humiliation. The world would know he had doubted his father. The monarchy would see him as disloyal. And Charles? How would their relationship ever recover from the mere act of testing? And what if the test proved the whispers right? Then what? That question alone was enough to stop him. So Harry remained stuck in limbo. Doubtful, tormented, haunted, destroyed every day, as Meghan said. But here's the emotional punch. By admitting, "I've always wondered," Harry wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for millions who live with unanswered questions about their families, their identities, their origins. That's why his words resonated so deeply. Because behind the crown, behind the title, behind the scandal, he was just a man asking the most human question of all, who am I? And yet, every time he asked it, even in whispers, the palace grew colder. William grew angrier. Charles grew more distant. Because for them, the question wasn't just personal, it was political. It was dangerous. It was taboo. So Harry turned to Meghan. And Meghan, unable to carry the weight in silence, finally cracked. She spoke the truth out loud. And in doing so, she confirmed what Harry himself had already admitted in fragments. But here's the cliffhanger. If Harry has always wondered, then isn't the next step inevitable? Isn't the next step the one thing he's been avoiding all his life? The test. The DNA. The proof. And whispers suggest that behind palace doors, behind the carefully managed image, discussions about such a test have already happened. Quietly, secretly. So the real question isn't whether Harry has wondered. It's whether he has acted. And what comes next may be the answer the world has been waiting for. What happens when whispers don't just divide a man from his father, but from his brother, the one person who should have been his ally? What happens when the very blood bond that should unite two princes becomes poisoned by suspicion, resentment, and silence? For William and Harry, the whispers of Harry's paternity weren't just background noise. They were dynamite waiting to explode. And when it did, the fallout wasn't just personal, it was historic. Let's begin with the contradiction. William grew up as the golden boy, the heir, the one who looked like Diana, yet carried Charles's features clearly enough to leave no doubt about his place in the bloodline. For William, identity was never a question. It was destiny. But Harry? Harry was different. Red-haired, mischievous, wild. A rebel in a palace that demanded conformity. And William, whether he admitted it or not, must have heard the whispers too. Imagine being a young boy, watching your brother mocked in tabloids. Watching strangers laugh at the suggestion that he might not even be a Windsor. And imagine knowing that you'll one day be king, while your brother, questioned, ridiculed, doubted, will forever be the spare. Do you think William defended him? Or do you think he resented him? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Reports suggest that William hated the rumors. Not because they hurt Harry, but because they hurt the monarchy. He saw them as a threat to stability, to legitimacy, to his own future. And rather than comfort his brother, insiders claim he often shut Harry down, telling him to stop fueling the gossip, to stop giving the tabloids ammunition. But how do you tell a man to stop hurting when his pain isn't a choice? That's where the cracks between them widened. Now picture this. Two brothers, one crowned with certainty, the other plagued with doubt, living under the same roof, walking the same halls, yet carrying two entirely different realities. William believed his duty was to ignore the whispers, to protect the monarchy by never acknowledging them. Harry, on the other hand, believed his duty was to his own sanity. To confront them, to demand answers, to refuse to let silence consume him. And what happens when duty collides with pain? War. Let's talk about one infamous confrontation. According to insiders, during a heated argument, Harry lashed out at William, accusing him of never understanding the torment he endured. William, furious, reportedly snapped back. "You're making things worse. Stop playing into their hands." Think about those words. To William, Harry's vulnerability wasn't just weakness, it was recklessness. But to Harry, William's coldness wasn't strength, it was betrayal. This is the contradiction at the heart of their relationship. William sees the monarchy as something to be protected at all costs, even at the expense of personal truth. Harry sees the monarchy as the source of his torment, the very reason his truth has been buried. And Meghan? She only made the rift sharper. Because William believed she encouraged Harry to confront his demons publicly, to speak out in ways that endangered the crown. But Harry believed Meghan was the first person who truly listened to him, who validated his pain instead of dismissing it. Do you see how this battle wasn't really about Meghan? She was just the catalyst. The real war was always between the brothers, between duty and identity, between silence and confession. Now let's go deeper. William's anger wasn't just about Harry's words. It was about the threat they posed to his future as king. Imagine this. You're William. You've spent your whole life preparing for the throne. And suddenly, your brother starts questioning his own legitimacy. Do you realize what that does? It puts the entire royal line under suspicion. Because if Harry isn't Charles's son, then what does that say about the family? About Diana? About the monarchy itself? That's why William couldn't allow it. Not as a brother. Not as the heir. And so, the whispers didn't just destroy Harry's peace of mind. They destroyed the brothers' bond. Let's bring this closer to the present. In interviews, Harry has spoken about the distance between him and William, about the shouting matches, about the physical altercations. And while the public focused on the drama of Meghan and Kate, the real drama was happening between the two brothers, decades of resentment boiling over. Because every time Harry said, "I've always wondered," William heard, "You're putting the crown at risk." And every time William said, "Stay silent," Harry heard, "Your pain doesn't matter." How do you bridge a gap like that? The truth is, you don't. That's why today, they stand worlds apart. William, the dutiful heir, carrying the weight of the crown. Harry, the exiled spare, carrying the weight of doubt. Two brothers, born of the same mother, yet divided by the very question Diana herself foresaw in her letters. And here's the irony. The monarchy thrives on the image of unity, the idea that the Windsors are one unbreakable family. Yet nothing has exposed their fractures more than the whispers about Harry's paternity. Whispers that turned into doubts, doubts that turned into resentment, resentment that turned into war. Now pause and ask yourself, if Diana were alive, what would she have said? Would she have defended Harry publicly? Would she have scolded William for his coldness? Or would she have begged them both to put love before duty? We'll never know. But what we do know is this. Meghan picked up where Diana left off. She became Harry's voice when William would not. She validated the very pain William dismissed. And that validation deepened the divide between the brothers beyond repair. And yet, the war between William and Harry is not just personal. It's symbolic. It represents the clash between two visions of the monarchy, one rooted in silence, tradition, and survival at all costs. The other rooted in truth, vulnerability, and a desperate need for healing. But here's the cliffhanger. For all of William's anger, for all of Harry's torment, there's something looming on the horizon that neither brother can ignore. Something that could force the question Harry has avoided all his life into the open. Science, genetic testing, and in recent years, advances in DNA technology have made the unthinkable possible. What happens when whispers meet hard evidence? Because soon, the choice may no longer be Harry's to make. What happens when whispers and speculation collide with science? When gossip that once seemed untouchable is suddenly placed under the cold, unforgiving lens of DNA. For Harry, the question of identity was once a matter of rumor and ridicule. But today, in an age where a single swab of saliva can rewrite entire family histories, the whispers that haunted him may soon have hard answers. Let's begin with a simple fact. Science doesn't lie. Bloodlines can be debated. Features can be compared. But DNA is definitive. And yet, the irony is this. While the rest of the world races ahead with ancestry kits, genetic testing, and databases that link cousins across continents, the royal family clings desperately to secrecy. Why? Because once you let science into the palace, you can never close the door again. Let's pause here and ask a provocative question. What would a DNA test reveal about Prince Harry? The logical answer is simple. It would confirm Charles is his father, once and for all, silencing the whispers. But is it that simple? Or would it open Pandora's box? Here's the contradiction. Every scientific fact we know supports Charles being Harry's father. The affair between Diana and James Hewitt began in 1986, 2 years after Harry's birth. End of story, right? Case closed. But why? Then, do the rumors refuse to die? Why do people still cling to the theory that Hewitt fathered Harry? Because science may provide clarity, but perception thrives on doubt. And in Harry's case, doubt has been more powerful than truth. Now, let's dig deeper. Over the years, geneticists and forensic experts have been asked their opinions. Many have pointed to undeniable traits Harry shares with Charles and even with Philip, the late Duke of Edinburgh. The shape of the nose, the jawline, the distance between the eyes. These features, they argue, are Windsor through and through. Yet, others counter with those infamous photographs. Harry as a boy beside James Hewitt, the striking red hair, the uncanny resemblance in posture and grin. Do you see how science and perception collide? On one side, experts insist the timeline and genetics clear Charles. On the other, the public clings to visual evidence and emotional suspicion. And then, there's the future of science itself. Think about this. In today's world, you don't even need to willingly take a DNA test to have your genetic information exposed. Relatives submit their samples to ancestry databases. Matches are made. Connections are drawn. Entire family secrets, illegitimate children, hidden affairs, lost siblings, are uncovered without consent. So here's the bombshell. Even if Harry never takes a DNA test, someone else could. A distant cousin, a relative from Diana's side, a Windsor family member. All it takes is one match, one leak, and the truth Harry has avoided for decades could come crashing into the public eye. And do you know what's even more chilling? The rumors suggest it's already happened. Whispers from insiders claim that private DNA testing has been quietly conducted within royal circles, not by Harry, but by those desperate to protect the crown. Unofficial, off-the-record comparisons. A way to reassure themselves that the monarchy's legitimacy isn't at risk. And while no results have ever surfaced publicly, the very fact that such testing might have been attempted proves one thing. The fear inside the palace is real. Now, pause and imagine the palace war room. Advisors gathered around a table, files in hand, debating whether to pursue genetic confirmation of the bloodline. On one side, the pragmatists. If we confirm it quietly, we can put the whispers to rest. On the other, the traditionalists. If we test, we admit doubt. And doubt is death to the crown. Which side do you think won? History tells us the traditionalists. Because silence has always been the monarchy's survival tool. And yet, science doesn't care about silence. Science doesn't need permission to reveal the truth. Let's zoom in on Harry himself. Remember how Meghan said, "It destroys him every day?" Part of that destruction is knowing the solution exists, yet fearing what it might reveal. Harry has lived in a world where a simple test could end decades of torment, but it could also confirm his worst nightmare. Would you take that test? Or would you live forever with the doubt? This is the cruel paradox of Harry's life. He craves the truth, but fears it. He despises the whispers, but feeds them with his silence. And every day that passes without proof, the world speculates more. Now let's bring in the public. Over the years, polls have been conducted. Do people believe Charles is Harry's father? Astonishingly, significant percentages of respondents say they doubt it. Imagine being Harry, reading those numbers. Imagine seeing your own identity treated as a public vote. And here's the contradiction again. Science could silence those polls forever. One test, one result. But Harry doesn't take it. Because maybe silence is safer than certainty. Let's dig into another angle, the science of resemblance. Did you know that red hair is a recessive trait? Both parents must carry the gene for it to appear in a child. Diana carried it. Charles's family, too, carried the gene. Look at Princess Margaret's line, for example. So Harry's red hair isn't proof of Hewitt's paternity. It's genetics playing its hand. And yet, the public clings to it as evidence. Do you see how flimsy facts can feel like hard proof when wrapped in scandal? And here's where the story gets even stranger. In the digital age, people don't just speculate, they investigate. Entire online communities have sprung up, analyzing photographs, comparing features, running amateur genealogy studies. The crowd has become its own investigator, blurring the line between gossip and research. And once again, Harry is at the center of it, his face dissected by strangers looking for answers that science could easily give, but that he refuses to seek. Now let's step back and ask, why does this matter so much? Why does Harry's paternity matter to the world? The answer is simple. Because the monarchy is built on blood. If blood is questioned, the monarchy itself is questioned. If Harry isn't Charles's son, then what does that mean for the institution? For succession? For the crown? That's why this rumor is not just personal, it's political dynamite. And Meghan knew it. That's why her confession, "It destroys him every day," was so explosive. Because she wasn't just speaking about Harry's pain. She was hinting at the monarchy's greatest fear, that science could one day expose its most guarded secret. But here's the cliffhanger. Science doesn't wait. DNA doesn't lie. And whispers inside the palace suggest that the question of Harry's bloodline may already have been tested. Not publicly, not officially, but quietly, in the shadows. And if that's true, then someone already knows the answer Harry has been too afraid to face. But who? And why have they stayed silent? The answer, as you'll see, leads straight back to Meghan herself, and the breaking point that shattered her silence forever. What drives someone to break the one rule the palace has always demanded? Silence. What pushes a woman, already accused of tearing down a monarchy, to confess a secret so explosive it could burn the entire institution to the ground? For Meghan Markle, that breaking point came not in a carefully staged interview, not in a scripted documentary, but in raw, unfiltered words that slipped past her guard. And in that moment, she revealed the truth she had carried for years. Harry's torment over his paternity was not just a rumor. It was his daily reality. "I can't hide it anymore. It destroys him every single day." Those words hit like dynamite. Because Meghan wasn't just airing out another palace feud or complaining about tabloid cruelty. She was lifting the veil on Harry's soul. She was exposing the one wound he had never been able to bandage, the one shadow he could never outrun. But why then? Why confess at that exact moment? Some say it was strategy, a move designed to seize control of the narrative before someone else weaponized it. Others say it was pure emotion, Meghan cracking under the weight of watching Harry suffer in silence. But whichever it was, one thing is clear. Meghan's breaking point was not about her. It was about him. Let's rewind to the days leading up to the confession. Meghan had been under siege, again. Headlines attacking her. Stories questioning her motives. Critics labeling her a manipulator, a liar, a destroyer of tradition. She had heard it all before. But this time, it wasn't just her reputation under fire. It was Harry's identity. Behind closed doors, Harry had been unraveling. The whispers had returned with new force. Online forums buzzing. Old photographs resurfacing. Comparisons to James Hewitt spreading once more. Harry, now a father himself, was breaking down. Because if he had always wondered about his own identity, what did that mean for his children? What would Archie and Lilibet inherit? Not in blood, but in doubt. Do you see the cruelty of it? Harry didn't just carry the whispers anymore. They now threatened to stain the next generation. And Meghan, as a mother, couldn't stand by and watch. So when the opportunity came, an interview, a conversation, a moment when the weight of silence was too much, she cracked. She confessed. And the world stopped. Now let's be clear. Meghan didn't say, Charles isn't Harry's father. She didn't name James Hewitt. She didn't claim to have proof. But what she did say was far more powerful, that Harry's daily destruction came not from outside attacks, but from the whispers he carried inside. And that, in itself, was confirmation. Confirmation that the rumor wasn't just tabloid fodder. Confirmation that it wasn't just a cruel joke made by late-night hosts. Confirmation that it was a wound carved so deep into Harry's soul that no amount of royal protocol, therapy, or distance could erase it. Let's pause here. Imagine being Meghan in that moment. You've married a prince, but behind the title you've discovered a broken man. You've seen him cry over whispers. You've seen him rage at the mention of Hewitt's name. You've seen him doubt himself, doubt his father, doubt his very bloodline. And every day, you've watched him put on a smile for the cameras while falling apart in private. Would you stay silent? Or would you speak? Because Meghan made her choice. And in doing so, she changed everything. The confession wasn't just emotional, it was strategic in its own way. Because once Meghan said it out loud, the story was no longer whispered in tabloids. It was declared by the woman closest to Harry. It wasn't speculation. It was testimony. And here's the irony. By speaking out, Meghan reignited the fire she wanted to extinguish. Headlines exploded. Social media spiraled. Analysts dissected every word. And Harry was thrust back under the microscope. But maybe that was the point. Maybe Meghan realized that silence was more destructive than exposure. That by dragging the ghost into the light, she could rob it of some of its power. Do you think she was right? Or do you think she only made it worse? Because the palace certainly thought she made it worse. Reports claim senior royals were furious, that Meghan had crossed the one line they could never allow. Speaking of Harry's paternity, to them, this wasn't just betrayal, it was treason. And yet, to Meghan, it was love, a desperate act by a wife who couldn't watch her husband crumble any longer. Now here's the twist. Meghan's confession wasn't just words. It came with hints. Subtle suggestions that she knew more. She spoke of documents. She implied there was evidence the palace had buried. She left breadcrumbs that suggested the truth wasn't just rumor. It was written down, hidden, suppressed. What were those documents? Letters from Diana? Memos from palace officials? Notes from advisors strategizing how to handle the whispers? We don't know. But Meghan's tone was clear. There's more. And that hint turned her confession from emotional slip into political bombshell. Because if documents exist, then the palace isn't just guilty of silence. It's guilty of cover-up. Now pause and ask yourself, would Meghan really risk everything, her reputation, her marriage, her safety, just to make a dramatic statement? Or did she finally reach the point where the truth mattered more than the consequences? Because in that moment, Meghan wasn't just a duchess. She wasn't just a celebrity. She wasn't just Harry's wife. She was a whistleblower. And whistleblowers don't stop once they start. But here's the cliffhanger. Meghan's confession didn't just stir the media. It stirred the insiders. Because after her words, sources from within the palace, advisors, staff, even supposed friends of the royals, began speaking. Some in defense, some in outrage, and some with revelations that shocked even Meghan herself. Because the confession wasn't the end. It was the trigger, the spark that ignited the media frenzy, the backlash, and the voices that had stayed silent until now. And the very next voice to speak out would prove just how deep the rabbit hole went. The tabloids, of course, had a field day. They plastered side-by-side photos of Harry and James Hewitt on their covers again, grinning like vultures circling fresh prey. Old clippings from the 90s resurfaced. Archive footage of Diana with Hewitt was replayed endlessly. The story was too good to resist. The People's Princess, the affair, the red-haired lover, and the troubled prince who still carried the wound. But beyond the tabloids, mainstream outlets took it seriously. Analysts asked, what does this mean for the monarchy? What does this reveal about the palace's handling of Harry? Could Meghan's words signal something even bigger? Evidence, documents, or letters waiting to surface? And then came the backlash.